Hey guys, so welcome to the Health Optimization podcast today, and I'm really excited to be speaking with Dr. Jolene Brighten, all about female hormone optimization and fertility. So welcome to the show.
Hi there, thanks so much for having me.
I'm really happy to be having this today with you. As I was saying to you just before we started recording, that the majority of my team is female, and understanding female cycles and this whole piece of health optimization or biohacking, which has been kind of hidden or not spoken about so much until the last year, really. It's really awesome to understand more about it. I've been reading up a bit about it in prep and trying to understand it as much as I can. So I'm really excited to dive into this today and introduce it to our followers. So I'm just going to dive straight in, Jolene. And so what got you into the field of hormone optimization originally?
You know, the funny thing is that I actually thought I'd focus in gut health, and that was going to be my focus in clinical practice. And it was in my classes, so all of our gynecological classes, they started to realize that women's medicine was so often done to them, not with them. And I was having all these moments realizing that there was so much I didn't know about my own body. So I remember sitting in medical school thinking, like, wow, I can only get pregnant one day out of the month, and I've been taking a birth control pill every single day because I was told I could get pregnant any day out of the month. And so that was really what inspired me. So I was like, I want to do women's medicine better. You shouldn't have to go to medical school to understand the body you live in. This is information that we should all have access to. And I'm a bit of a nerd. And so I come from a nutritional biochemistry background. So when we start talking hormone pathways, that's something that just delights me. And I love, when a doctor says to me, like, hormones are just too complicated, they're too difficult to understand, like I just don't even mess with them. And to really break that down and simplify that, it's why I love lecturing to practitioners, and I do that all over the world, to help them understand how to help their patients. But as you see me on social media and everywhere else, I really love educating the general public, both men and women, because we should all understand how each other's bodies work.
I agree. I completely agree. So, I mean, it's a really interesting phase. I mean, one of the things I learned a few weeks ago is that women in their ovulation cycle, or the part of their ovulation, is actually, it's really interesting because I was discussing this with a girlfriend of mine. She was saying, well, you guys, you're always pretty much on the whole month round, whereas we get it during ovulation. I was like, what? Sorry? She said, yeah. So it's the mating part of the month where, we become much more sexually active and actually start thinking like a guy for a few days every month. I was like, are you joking? She said, no. Yeah. We have a few days a month where it's like you. And it was like, that was just being 41, nearly 42, and having dated girls for 20 odd years. It's like, to find that out now, it's just absolutely mind blowing, and how more people don't know this, or the doctors don't seem to communicate this stuff. It's just
well, as we're going to talk about today, I mean, most doctors only think that it's most pertinent to educate about ovulation when someone is trying to conceive. And even then, it's generally after someone's struggled to conceive for months that they're like, oh, well, let me actually tell you how it works. I mean, I did a TikTok video on ovulation. You can only get pregnant one day out of the month. And I was blown away by 2 million people coming in and just them having these moments of like, I never knew, how did I never know this? How have I been told otherwise my entire life? And it's the same thing to understand that, we see a lot in the media where it's like, whenever it's like a movie and there's sexual attraction, it's like 24/7, the woman is always on. And like, it's just this like artificial ideal. I mean, even when it comes to lubrication, where women will come to me and they're like, oh, I have vaginal dryness, something's wrong with me. Well, let's talk about when that shows up. Oh, it's worse, like, before the week before my period and, following my period. I'm like, that's actually normal. Lubrication is actually at its peak. That's going to be around ovulation because you're producing fertile cervical mucus during that time. And you're trying to have a baby. Like, that's what your body's goal is. If you don't have that goal, that's okay. We don't have to tell your body. We're not going to do that, but you want to support your body in its natural rhythm. But it's things like this that I think so many of us, you know, I mean, I have women that come to me in their 60s who are like, how did I never know any of these things? So if anyone's listening right now and they're like, I never do this, you are not alone. In the United States where I'm at, there's only 17 states that mandate medically accurate sex education. So we've only got 17 states that make it medically accurate. It's roughly 9 that is inclusive, which means that the boys and the girls aren't getting different information, that they're actually culturally appropriate, and they're looking at things from, you know, a more holistic perspective. And so when you recognize that, everyone can just drop the shame, because it's not you, it's an entire system that's really not giving you the information you need about your body.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm finding this more and more actually in other areas of health as well. It's I did a post on Instagram, I think it was last week or the week before. It's like, imagine if you went to the doctors and they said, how much sunlight are you getting? Are you grounding? Are you breathing? Yeah. Or doing breath work? It's like, are you eating high nutrient dense foods? And is it organic? It's like, do they ask any of this stuff before they say, okay, here's your prescription? And it's like, and I actually, Dr. Amy Killen, who I know, you know, obviously,
love Amy.
And I put on there, it's about education first. And she said, well, actually, it's about easing people into this and letting them know that there is another way. But I think if medical school actually said it's this first, that second, that would filter down to the general population a lot better, and we would all have a much more consistent view on these things. But I do think it's shaping up quite quickly now, especially with people such as yourselves, putting the information out there and saying, no, it's this way. I do think the system will change slowly, but it will, definitely. And I think
it's a bit of pressure we're putting on the system. I mean, the way I view my role is to educate and to help empower the patient to enter into that doctor's visit to advocate for themselves. And so when a patient is better informed, so this is, you know, I'm talking about like social media, my books, my website, drbrighten.com, this work that I do, it's about getting you so informed that when you go to your doctor's office, you can't be gaslit. Your doctor can't say to you, oh, like, you don't know your body, like that can't happen. And instead, you know, the language to use, the data you need to be tracking. Like, I educate women that, like, you should know, when was your last menstrual period? How long is your cycle from one period to the next period? How many days do you bleed for? Is it heavy? Do you have other symptoms leading up to it? Like, do you have issues with your mood, your sleep? Do you have pooping problems going on? And so often I'll hear that women say, my doctor has never asked me any of these things. How are we just neglecting the monthly cycle that takes place? Like, that is something that ACOG has deemed the 5th vital sign. And that was a while ago. That is to say to doctors, hey, it's right up there with blood pressure and temperature. Like, if you want to measure how vital someone is, you need to assess their period. And it seems to be not until things get really bad that women get heard, which is a very, very old story in medicine. I mean, we don't have the mother of gynecological medicine. We don't have the mother of women's medicine. It's the father. It's the father. And you guys can go look up, you know, Marion Sims, and he ain't got a pretty history. But when you see it from that perspective of, like, modern gynecology is founded by men, and everything is born out of the man's perspective, and that's what's shaped and influenced women's health, you start to understand why there is such a disconnect in so many of these things. And, you know, to your point with, like, you know, I don't think we're going to see doctors. I mean, I'm a bit unique because I studied nutrition first, then became a doctor. I don't think we're going to see a lot of doctors, you know, starting to adopt nutrition in their curriculum. I don't think we're going to see those kinds of changes. And really, your doctor's not the best person for nutrition advice. I mean, there are other healthcare providers out there. What I think we're going to see is doctors recognizing and respecting that they're not the end all be all, and that it takes a team to have optimal health. And while they may not have the expertise to guide you in diet and lifestyle, I would hope that they would have enough so that they're living in a way that's congruent with health. But they can be able to refer you to a nutritionist, a dietitian, to get you, you know, with a personal trainer, to make these recommendations. And I say that because, you know, your doctor's got to know a lot of stuff. And, like, they're first and foremost, they're going, are you going to die? Or are you not going to die? Like, this is first and foremost. This is great. We need that person. And yet we can't put everything on them to be everything to everyone. And I'm just a big fan of the team approach and people having a team of providers. It's kind of a checks and balance too. It's the same way we have, like when I write a prescription for a pharmaceutical, the pharmacist is checking what other prescriptions you're on. And we're just making sure that you are covered in your health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very, very fair point. I mean, I like the team approach as well. I really like the team approach. It's like, I was having a discussion with quite a well-known bodybuilder, biohacker, a few days ago. It's quite funny. And we do very similar in modalities in biohacking, and yet we're looking at exactly the same thing from a very different angle. And this new idea was formed in between. And it's just like, individually, we couldn't have done that. It's just really great how you're looking at the same thing from another angle. So I'm really a big fan of that, especially in some of these newer, I guess, health optimization clinics that really do have a team of specialists that sit around and discuss this case. I think it's really awesome. So what's been your own experience with birth control?
I just laugh because if anybody listening has read Beyond the Pill, my book, then they know my experience with birth control, where I actually, walk through. I mean, I think all of us have some story with birth control, even whether we've been on it or not. So with me, I had horrible 7, 8, sometimes 9-day long periods. I bled through my clothes every single month. They were debilitatingly painful. So I'd miss school at least 1 day, if not 2 days every month. And so when my doctor recommended birth control, and mind you, I got my period at 14. So here I am at 17, 3 years of just hating my body, hating my life, hating my period, hating everything and feeling like it's a curse. And my doctor said, well, here's birth control and it'll fix your period and you also won't get pregnant. So bonus, when you become sexually active, then you won't get pregnant. And I was like, sign me up. We can not have periods. Fantastic. Well, initially, and I'm dating myself, back then, we didn't skip periods. We still did our placebo week. And it was several years later that my doctor was like, you don't have to have a period. Why is this? This is always where people get confused. A period on a birth control pill, it's not actually a period. It's a medication-induced withdrawal bleed. It's not necessary because you're not ovulating. So the goal of your menstrual cycle is ovulation and procreation. The period is the fallout when all of that fails. And that's, I know, like if you're hearing this for the first time, that's a bit of a mindset shift because we're always so focused on the period. I mean, it's the easiest thing for us to track. It's very obvious when it comes. And so I actually went into years of not having a period, thinking I was so smart, thinking that, oh, I'm in control of my body and I will tell it to bleed when I want to bleed. And I just can't help but laugh. And I'm like, oh, how many things about my 20-something-year-old self I just laugh about. What are you going to do? So in that, though, I struggled with so many issues while on birth control, not realizing it was my birth control. I had tons of gastrointestinal issues, which, that was a big reason why I wanted to focus on gut health as a doctor, because I just struggled for so long with gut issues. I had joint pain, low libido, and then I had chronic yeast vaginitis, and I had pain with sex. And it got so bad that my doctor said to me, we should actually cut your pudendal nerve. We should just do a surgery and cut the nerve to your pelvis so that you can have sex without pain, but also you'll never have an orgasm. Anyone who knows me knows I prescribe orgasms because they're incredibly powerful medicine for the female body. I mean, when you get oxytocin going, cortisol doesn't stand a chance in the aging capacity. And it's a great workout for your pelvic floor muscles. Like there's so many great things about orgasms, but, so for me, it wasn't until, and I just kept like, this is the only way. Like, I feel like a Mandalorian right now. This is the way, this is the way. And if anyone's not a Star Wars nerd, that's a Star Wars reference. But with that, I, totally thought like, this is the only way. And it was once I got to medical school and I learned that you can only get pregnant 1 day out of the month. I was like, wait a minute. And then I started learning, because I was in naturopathic medical school, that like, there's all of these things you can do to fix your period for good. And that what I had going on was estrogen dominance. And so I stopped birth control and thought, I'm just going to get my period back. Like everything's going to be fine. My doctor told me if I come off the pill, I can get pregnant right away. So like no issues. And then my period went missing. And it went missing for several months. And I will tell you, I never wanted a baby. And then when you can't, like when you're like faced with like, you may not have the choice, things start to change in your mind. But, and so it got scary where it's like, I'm not ovulating, I'm not having a period, I might not be able to have a baby. My doctor told me, oh, you know, at the time he said, oh, you must have PCOS all along. You're misremembering your periods. They were always irregular. And because I broke out with cystic acne all over my face, it was horrific. And I never had acne before. And, you know, he was straight up like, you don't know your body. You don't know your period. I'm like, no, I counted it down like doomsday. You don't understand. I knew it came every month because I dreaded it. And I did that for 3 years before going on the pill for a decade. And, you know, I had a whole host of symptoms. So mood swings, I mean, and everything I'm describing, if you are someone who's gone off the pill, this can happen with other forms of hormonal birth control as well. This is what we call post-birth control syndrome. So this is really the fallout of having been on birth control for so long. And it was only once, you know, I got into my research and seeing so many patients with it. So with myself, I was like, got my period back, got my skin clear, was able to do all of these things, but also thought it was just me. Like this was just some freak thing until I saw patient after patient telling me how hard it was to break up with birth control. And I started looking at the research and realizing like, this stuff disrupts your microbiome. I mean, back when I started birth control, nobody cared about the microbiome. Like back then, people were like, it's a bunch of freeloaders. It makes a little bit of vitamin K, B12. Other than that, it just eats your food, produces gas. It's the worst. Now look at us. We're like, oh, snap. That was all wrong, which is to tell you how humble we need to be in science and medicine and not think we know it all. But with that, you know, to see that it causes intestinal hyperpermeability. So we're going to see food sensitivities developing with that. The nutrient depletions that it can lead to. So magnesium, zinc, selenium. I mean, there's just so many of these things with birth control that we're just not told before we're given that prescription.
Yeah, it's insane. It's absolutely insane, isn't it? Absolutely insane. Yeah. I mean, I've heard this so many times, or similar things so many times over the last, I guess, 8-10 years since I got into biohacking, and it's just insane how it's so obvious and yet so not. You know what I mean?
It's challenged, right? And there's a lot of fear around birth control in that if we tell the truth about birth control, women won't want to take it, and then we'll have unplanned pregnancies. I come from the perspective that I believe that we can educate women in a way that they understand, not just in doctor jargon speak, but in a way they understand to have that informed consent, to make the best decision for themselves, and that we can trust them to do so, and that we can support them through the process. But the other fear is that if we call out the issues with birth control, if we start doing research that that actually like validates what women have been saying already, that will be used by legislators to take it away from us. And that's probably, you know, I would say that's a valid concern, is that, you know, there's always like an agenda to basically control the female body. Like that's what it comes down to, is how do we control the female body? And access to birth control is absolutely essential, especially for certain populations, as is informed consent. And so that's really what I advocate for, is that you have all the information and we also have access so that you can make the choice. There's no right or wrong choice here. Like you get to choose for your body. I'm not in a place to judge you because I don't live in your body, but I want you to understand what might happen if you're on it and how to mitigate some of that.
Yeah, awesome. So tell me, what are some of the common misconceptions about fertility then, do you think?
That you can get pregnant any day of the month. That's one of the things that I will say. I think it's so important to understand because that can help you avoid pregnancy, but also get pregnant. And so often I will have a woman come in and she's like, I've been trying, and I'm like, how are you timing it? I mean, I have to time it. Yes, you have to time it. And so that's one thing, is you have to time it. I think another big misconception is that it's always the woman that's the issue. And if you think men are 50% of the equation, right? So that sperm matters as well. And so that's another big misconception, is that we always have to be so focused on the female body. The female body is weighted in more importance from the fact that it is the seed and the soil. So it's not just about getting pregnant. So sperm goes in, it does its job, call it a day. So that's it, right? But then once pregnancy occurs, you have to carry that baby and then nourish that baby, which is like an incredible thing. You grow an entire human in your body, you birth it, and then you're able to feed it. I mean, it's seriously, it deserves respect. So that's why we put so much focus on the female body. But oftentimes, you know, there are issues with male sperm. And so we have to be looking at that as well. And I think another big misconception is that you start preparing for pregnancy when you start trying, when you decide to conceive. And we have to understand that the egg takes at least 90 days to mature to be ovulated. So the egg you ovulate, so everyone listening right now, you ovulated this month, that egg, you go 3 months back, that egg was maturing during that time. And so we've got a 90-day window to really prep that egg. Really, it would be much better to give yourself 6 months to even a year, just depending on your health and your individual health factors. So that's a big thing that I try to emphasize, because so often I will hear doctors say, like, once you get pregnant, start a prenatal. I'm like, once you find out you're pregnant, your baby already needed folate. So you already needed folate before you peed on the stick and you saw that little like plus or double line or pregnancy sign. Your baby already needed folate. And so we have to be making sure that we're optimizing nutrients. If your nutrients are optimized before pregnancy, it's so much easier. So we look at like iron deficiency anemia, super common in pregnancy. Most doctors are not testing ferritin, the storage form of iron. That's your savings account. If that's below 50, it's going to be difficult in pregnancy. We want to get that closer to 90, because then it's very unlikely you're going to experience iron deficiency anemia. And that's not just feeling tired, that's not oxygenating your brain and baby, like your body all together. And if we can't oxygenate, then we can't work out. And if we can't work out, then we can't optimize insulin during pregnancy. We can look at other risk factors that come along with that.
It's really interesting, actually. One thing I'd just like to put in as a layman, complete layman almost, is that when people say, like, for instance, friends of friends that haven't even had their period after being on the pill, for instance, and they're like, they want to try for a baby, but they haven't even got a period, or they haven't even been on the pill, they're not getting their period because they've been keto or low carb for so long. It's like your body just isn't ready to make a baby. It's not able to sustain itself, let alone a new life form inside you. You have to understand that until your body is ready, it's not going to get pregnant, and if it is, it's not necessarily going to be the healthiest. So having the building blocks in place first is absolutely critical, and then the period will come, obviously, and then you'll be able to get pregnant, and then you have a healthier baby. And it's just really interesting how some people just don't associate, for instance, missing a period with being unhealthy. They just the disconnect, and it's just really interesting. I think that was one of the things that really struck me about the whole thing.
I was just going to say, you make a great point, because what you just said there is, if you are keto or you're low carb and you lose your period, then that is your body telling you you have an issue. So you're not going to ovulate unless the environment is safe. You are literally signaling to your body that you are in a state of famine and that it is not safe. And if you're like, well, I don't care, natural birth control, I don't want to have a baby, care about your brain, care about your bones, care about your heart, because without estrogen and progesterone, you are going to start aging rapidly. And yes, your skin will start to sag, your breasts are going to droop, you are going to get fine lines and wrinkles. But we know that, you know, without progesterone, natural progesterone, our neuroplasticity can suffer. We don't build the myelin sheath in the same way. Like, these hormones are really, really important. So if you don't want to have a baby, but you want to be cognitively sharp, you definitely want these hormones. But you were going to say something else?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's really interesting because just to touch back on the keto or low carb or too much exercise and not having a period, I always like to link everything back to ancestral. Not that I'm particularly a main paleo guy or anything, but I do the mindset of what we evolved with, we survived with, and made it to this point where we're not surviving quite so good, maybe for longer on medications, but not necessarily for so long. But it's like the way that I always discuss it is that back to the old cave, you know, the sunrise comes up it wakes us up with the blue light. The man goes off, kills an animal, collects food or whatever, brings it back to the cave, gives it to the female to cook for the family. There'll be a store of food that will be fermenting in the cave because there's not a sterile fridge. The man would then go off and he would carry enough food with him to eat for the day while the family had a store of it. So the fasting windows for women are significantly bigger, smaller, sorry, than for men, where they can eat in 6 or 8 hours without having their hormones messed up. In fact, they thrive on it. Whereas the females, if they fast too long, then their hormones go all over the place because we didn't evolve that way. And then women that are fasting, and some people say, oh, I'm eating in a 6-hour window, it's amazing. It's like, how's that working for you? Yeah, I feel amazing. Oh, okay, how's your period? No, I haven't got a period. So it's like, well, it's because your body is thinking that you're doing the male role by going out and grabbing food and exercising too much opposed to nurturing. And I think that's where, for me, correct me if I'm wrong because I'm not the expert, but John Gray's work talks about if you put a man in a nurturing position at home looking after the kids, his estrogen will come up and his testosterone will come down because it's adjusting to the environment. And if you put a woman in a high-powered business role, her testosterone will come up, so will her sex drive, obviously, and her estrogen will come down, and she won't be able to make babies because she's in the providing mode. And so if you then swap those two around, then the testosterone comes up in the man and the estrogen comes up in the woman, and then they can have kids. So it's just when I hear people that are exercising too much or fasting too much or being too keto as a female and losing their periods, it's because, in my opinion, their environment is thinking it's a male and it's adjusting. It's just a very, very smart machine. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, and feel free to tear it apart because that's just my assumptions from the bits of things I've heard all over the place.
Yeah, well, I mean, you did just reduce things down to like gender roles as having an influence over our hormones, and I don't think it's as much of like gender roles. I'm not sure, like I don't work with men, so I couldn't really speak to like I've never seen a study showing that like estrogen levels prime or anything like that. I will say that, with women in a high stress, high power role, it's not the role. It's not that like you've assumed the, the role of like the, the provider. And I will say I'm the CEO of my company and I run things. It's not the role that like, oh, because I'm in this position and we have this dynamic that will shift my hormones. It's as much as the stress of the role that you're in. And so if the stress is going high, women are very, very sensitive to stress, then we can see that the adrenal glands will start to shift things, that we can see the brain is now signaling, let's make cortisol opposed to progesterone. Let's convert our DHEA into testosterone. We know that, those kinds of things can happen due to stress. And when we look back, it's often thought, and I'm not sure what tribes, he's speaking to, it's often thought that like all tribes was like the women were the stay home and the men were the hunters. But what we see is that, in some Native American tribes, there was much more of an equality in that, where there were women who hunted. We did see that, they also had, individuals that were called two-spirits, that, they were, essentially what we would call trans today, that would assume different kinds of roles. And so it's actually more complicated than just being like, women stayed home and took care of the babies, because we also know there were tribes of women that just handled it all. Like they did it all, and they still were able to have babies. And so I think it's less about like, what is the role that you are assuming in life, whether you want to be a mother or you don't want to be a mother, whether you want to, be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company or be a stay-at-home mom. It's because being a stay-at-home mom, I will tell you, that can mess with your hormones greatly because of the lack of support that we have in our society. And so it's not just so much about the role as much as it is about how your stress is, how you handle your stress, your self-care. And really, there's the genetic makeup, yes, but there's also the genetic, or not the genetic, but the generational influence of stress. So depending on your, generational lineage, so your family history, they may have been exposed to more stressors. So did they go through a famine? We know like this has happened in Ireland. It also happened during the Holocaust. We also know in the African-American population that like they can be more predisposed to basically having the worst of the worst impacts of the littlest amounts of stress. And so that's what we call allostatic load, where that stress is just breaking you down. And what we'll see is that their cortisol receptors will actually be upregulated. And it's not your body betraying you. It's your body saying, we've lived through some heavy, heavy shit. So if there's even a little bit of stress, we're going to be primed for it, and we are going to fight, or we're going to run. And it's less, I see less of the freezing in these populations when they describe their stress response. Of course, this is just in my patient populations who've talked about this, but it's about survival. And that's what it's about. So if we know that about someone, you could put them in any role. And if we don't have them really safeguarding their mental health, their physical health, and tending to their stress, we're going to see issues. And it can just be something, I mean, you can give someone the easiest life in the world, and then someone in their life passes away, and that completely throws everything off. And it's because even the littlest bit of stress can start to shift the system dramatically. So does that make sense in terms of how I'm explaining that?
100%. I mean, it's, yeah, I felt that was absolutely on point, in all honesty. Not that I'm critiquing it, but I completely agree about the different levels of stress, and what the stress hormones can do to someone, and how that can affect everything, even down to gut, and how we process our food, and then how that can imbalance our hormones. So yeah, it was an awesome explanation. I'm really looking forward to playing this back and hearing it again, in all honesty, as well. That's brilliant. Thank you.
No, thanks.
So just thinking, so what do you think the common causes of infertility are, or the most common causes that you see?
Yeah, well, the tricky thing about infertility is that sometimes we never know. Sometimes we never know what actually is causing infertility and causing someone to struggle. But some of the most common ones that I see in my practice is polycystic ovarian syndrome. So PCOS, which the hallmark of PCOS, one of the signs is that you don't ovulate, or you ovulate irregularly. And so obviously if you're not ovulating, there's no egg available to actually inseminate. So we've got to get you ovulating again. I also see that undiagnosed hypothyroidism can be a big issue. I don't know what it's like in the UK. In the US, we've had these huge reference ranges for a long time. And at one point, the American Thyroid Association had actually said that if your TSH is above 2.5 and you're trying to get pregnant, or you are pregnant, we need to start you on a medication. They've since retracted that and said, oh, maybe not so much, but I still see that to hold true in my practice. And so to give you an idea, the reference range, some doctors won't diagnose hypothyroidism until your TSH is 5 or more. Understand that TSH is a brain hormone. It's what your brain is saying to your thyroid. It's an indirect marker of thyroid function, which is why I never stop there, because TSH is great for understanding, how your brain is talking to your thyroid. If it's high, your brain is screaming at your thyroid. But it's that free T4 that your baby's going to need. And that is very necessary during the early stages of development and neurological development. And so this is something I always check, because if your TSH is below 1, or excuse me, your T4 is below 1, and this is a free T4, that's problematic. And that can be, something that leads to miscarriage, and recurrent miscarriage is not having adequate thyroid hormone, or having thyroid antibodies present. So we have to put those in remission as well. I will say that for people right now, they're like, what about free T3? I always say that free T4 is for baby, free T3 is for mama. Free T3 is what gives you your mood, your metabolism. That's what helps your periods come. If you are having irregular periods, we always have to check thyroid hormone. It's also why you poop every day. It's a very good thing. And yet it's not what crosses the placenta. It's not what baby utilizes. And baby needs your thyroid hormone, that T4 specifically, until about week 20 of pregnancy. So it's really, really crucial in that first trimester. And as we know, that's the most common time to see miscarriages develop. So those are two of the biggest conditions that I see. And then, I have to say that, infertility is often multifactorial. I think that's important for people to understand, because if you're focusing on what you eat, but not what you put on your body, that can be problematic. So there have been concerns raised about what is found in tampons. In the United States, we don't disclose what we're putting in tampons. We're like, there's some chemicals, it's going in a vagina, big mucous membrane, no big deal, right? But there's also concerns, you know, about lotions, about, you know, what's in your hair products. And I really detest the people who say like, the dose makes the poison. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. We have never done a study that asks what happens when a woman exposes herself to 12 to 15 personal products starting at age, I mean, I didn't start putting on makeup until I was like 14 or 15. And now we're seeing, you know, young girls putting on makeup at like 8 years old. And they expose themselves to that until they're like 28 years old or 38 years old and they're trying to have a baby. Like, we have no clue. When it comes to personal care products and long-term menstrual suppression with birth control, they're huge experiments. They're huge uncontrolled experiments. We actually just have no idea. I don't say that to scare you, but I say that because it's important that, like, if you're not looking at your environment as a whole, what are your cleaning products, what are your personal care products, and what is your food, you're missing a big piece of the puzzle. Because again, women are really in tune to stress. We are much more sensitive to stress. That doesn't mean we're less resilient. It's that we're more in tune. So over exercising, under eating, like those are stressors that our body has to be in tune with. Our body is constantly surveying the environment and saying, is it safe to make a baby? If so, we're going to give you awesome hormones. If not, we're going to withhold some hormones from you. So you want a hormone imbalance? You want to feel awful? Start signaling stress nonstop to your body. So to be looking at yourself as a whole person is really, really crucial in the infertility case. And to be tracking your data. And this is something I advocate for. You need to know, like, do you get in the mood? Do you have fertile cervical mucus? How often does your period come? The same things that we talked about before. Do you have breast tenderness? Do you feel like you want to cry all the time? Do you have changes in your gut health? Do you see changes in your skin? All of this is really important data to understand what is going on in your body.
That's really, really awesome. I love that you just did those last pointers as well, because my next question was, how does a woman know that her hormones are optimized? And I think you've just ticked about 5 or 6 of them in one go. I mean, I think, again, going back to John Gray, the one thing that he said for men was whether or not they wake up with morning wood. He said that's the biggest indicators, and we're very simple creatures actually. when we're optimized, that's what happens. But I think for obviously females, it's so much more complicated, as always. So really interesting to hear. So I mean, are there anything else that you think are good indicators for a woman to know that her hormones are optimized or are not optimized?
Yeah, well, I want to answer that. One thing I do want to say is that endometriosis can also be a big cause of infertility. And so if you are someone with endometriosis and you're contemplating becoming pregnant, meeting with your doctor and getting everything checked out, because adhesions can happen that can actually obstruct the ability of sperm to meet egg. And that is one that I will say, if you're struggling with infertility, really advocating with your doctor to do a deeper workup, because endometriosis doesn't always have painful periods and it doesn't always have really heavy periods. So if you've got period problems in general, you've got a hormone imbalance. So what's normal? I mean, this is the biggest thing that we're not told about our bodies, is like, what's normal? A period should last anywhere from 3 to 7 days. If you're going past 7 days, that's too long. If you are bleeding through a tampon every single hour, if you're having to double up with a tampon and a pad, and I'm not talking about a liner, I'm talking about a maxi pad, that is probably too much bleeding going on. And so that's what we call menorrhagia. And that can be, it can be due to several things, but it can be due to excess estrogen in the system as well. It's normal to get a little tired before your period. It's normal to feel a little bit emotional. It's normal to have a little bit of breast tenderness, a little bit of cramping. If you are in debilitating pain, you're writhing on the floor, you're popping Advil like every 6 hours, that's not normal. If you find that you can't walk down the stairs because your breasts are so tender, if you can't watch TV because everything and anything makes you cry, if you feel like the week before your period, you want to run away to the woods or kill someone, that's normal if you've got extreme PMS, but it's not normal for you to live with. So I just want you to don't feel like there's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with your hormones. And then of course, fatigue, hair loss, acne, digestive issues can be rooted. I mean, our gut and our hormones, they talk so much. It's a good thing that I wanted to focus on gut health first, because it all comes back to that, especially with hormones as well. And then certainly, you know, if those periods, you don't know when they're coming. So it's not abnormal. Everybody always thinks like we have a 28-day cycle. We don't. Very few do. And so you can have a 26-day cycle, you have a 32-day cycle. If it's over 45 days, that's when we start to get concerned. But as long as it's predictable, it's not a problem. But if you're like, I don't know when it's going to show up, I just never wear white pants ever, that's not normal.
It's really interesting, actually. There's a couple of things I just want to touch on, if I may. Number one is, I read a book, The Yeast Connection, and a whole load of books that were in that area, because after being on antibiotic personally for like 3 months, which ruined me, and it looked like I was pregnant it was horrendous. I started studying and reading and tearing apart every resource I could on yeast and candida and things. And it was really interesting. One thing that kept on coming up was the link with autism, and also with painful periods. And that went on antifungals, whether they're natural or the pharmaceuticals, actually, once they had resolved yeast issues, and that was over a period of months, not just, you know, taking one tablet to solve thrush, which is what a common misconception, I believe, is. That people's periods became a lot better and a lot less painful. And I remember reading so much of this, and this was, you know, 9 years ago, I guess. But it really struck with me that when someone says that they have painful periods or it's a real big problem for them, and then I ask them how their gut is, it's nearly always, oh yeah, I have bloating, or, you know, often gut bloating where their liver is stressed and they've got SIBO or something or other as well. And it's just the two are connected. So it's really interesting how you say that you started with gut and went on to hormones afterwards. And my dear friend, Dr. Dominic Nichwitz, he started off as a naturopathic doctor and then got into dentistry afterwards. So he's a dentist that focuses on health. And it's interesting.
I was a registered dental assistant before I became a naturopathic doctor. I was actually going to go to dental school until I had a dog bite my right hand. My pinky doesn't work so well anymore, which is like fine for normal function, not fine for working in your mouth with the drill. Wouldn't have been okay. So that's really funny.
So yeah, I often find that when they're not, like for instance with me with psychology, I've been in psychology like pretty much 15, 20 years of my life, but I didn't come in through formal training. I came in through alternative and then did the formal, more formal stuff later. And it's funny, I wasn't primed with the bias that, you know, you're more wide, you learn different areas of a subject that other people might miss. So I keep on seeing this pattern again and again and again with speakers, actually. Really fun to hear, actually. The other thing was, have you seen much around the MTHFR side of things? Because I've seen a few people with endometriosis, and I can never say that word, and people that haven't had a period for a long time. When you look at their MTHFR, they've got one of the variants, and then once you optimize their folate, obviously, and their B12, and put them on a better diet and optimize their gut a little bit, then funny how they seem to get pregnant quite quickly. I'm just wondering if you have much experience, or if you look at the MTHFR gene side of things at all.
Absolutely, every single time, especially when we're talking infertility. Most conventional doctors will not look at MTHFR until we've had recurrent miscarriage. I mean, at one point it was like, if you have 3 or more recurrent miscarriages, then we'll look at this. As someone who's had a miscarriage, I think that's an absolutely horrific guideline, when all you have to do is do a quick blood test and save a woman so much heartache and so much loss. And so, yes, so with MTHFR, this is what I was talking about with, like, your baby needs folate before you even know you're pregnant. That's why I, recommend all my patients, you start a prenatal 3 months or more before you get pregnant. And we will look at blood markers just to make sure we're not overdoing iron. But we have to look at MTHFR because what's in a prenatal sometimes isn't even enough for some people. And so I will look at MTHFR to understand if it's a problem. Yes, we want to look at folate, B12, it's metabolite methylmalonic acid, but we also want to be looking at homocysteine. And there have been correlations with homocysteine and developmental issues with baby. There is preliminary data suggesting, possible connection to autism, perhaps ADHD. So we have to be looking at that piece as well, because sometimes, fertility gets really myopic where it's just about get you pregnant. And we're not thinking about the health and longevity of the future of the human race. Like, this is not something to be taken lightly. Like, mothers are the caretaker of the future of our entire species. And so we have to be looking at those pieces as well. And so, you know, if those homocysteine levels are creeping up into the double digits, we're having issues with our metabolism. We really want to optimize that. And yes, folate, yes, B12, but we want to be looking at magnesium. We want to be getting our minerals in as well. I think so often, and I will see this conventionally as well, but it's like, I've actually just recently had a conventional doctor that my patient had MTHFR. They're like, you need to take folic acid. Why are you taking folate? And I was like, stop, just stop. And they prescribed him this high dose folic acid. I was like, no, we're not doing that. For people who don't know, you can't utilize that synthetic junk vitamin. It's really just, it's junk. I mean, why did we create, like, folic acid is so that we could put it into the general population to, you know, to prevent these neural tube defects. It has to be cheap to be able to do that. If you have MTHFR, you don't get to be cheap with your vitamins. You've got to use the higher quality. And then, of course, to recognize that you can't get everything in a supplement. So biohacking is something that is really crucial. You have to be eating your leafy green vegetables. So if you have MTHFR, it doesn't mean you're broken. It just means that you get a little less leadway. Like, well, someone else might be able to binge drink and, you know, wear perfume and do all these things that really weigh on the liver. You may be having like more issues with your detox capacity. So just to understand that, we want to test those things. Yes, you want to be on a prenatal with folate, not folic acid. I have a whole article at drbrighten.com on folate versus folic acid and all the studies and why we want one and not the other. I also have a guide on what to look for in a prenatal, because things like hydrogenated fats and known neurotoxins like food dye don't belong in a prenatal when you have a developing organism. It makes no sense to me, and yet it exists in the world. But with that, you know, I'm glad that you touched on that, because if you are someone who's ever had a miscarriage, it's just a good idea to get it checked out. Just get it checked out so that you know, because that can make all the difference in the world, not only for you having a healthy pregnancy that you can sustain, but having a healthy child and giving them the best foot forward in this world.
Yeah, absolutely epic advice. I mean, for the guys listening, I mean, I personally done 23andMe, which has obviously been bought out, so I'm not quite sure where the data goes these days.
I know, I'm like, I did it too. I'm like, great, where's my genetics now?
And there's also Self-Decode, who are also an exhibitor at the Health Optimisation Summit, and also Omnos. Our friends over at Omnos also have a really good genetic test there. Self-Decode has this whole platform where you can actually upload your DNA results in, and it makes it really easy to understand. So if any of you guys are wondering if you have the MTHFR, well, first of all, get a decent functional medicine practitioner. That's what I recommend. And in the meantime, get yourself a DNA test with Self-Decode or Omnos or something like that. And that would give you a good indication whether or not you've got MTHFR. If you've had problems with pregnancy or miscarriages, it's definitely worth checking it out. I know for me, for my energy and immune system and detoxification and all these issues that I've had over the last 10 years, methylation was a huge one for me to resolve my chronic fatigue. And obviously, if you're chronic fatigue and you're stressed and you haven't got the energy, your body's not going to work right. And that applies to women, obviously, for pregnancy as well, not just for guys, more energy. So just interesting, can you talk me through the stages of the female cycle for the layman specifically? I mean, obviously I've been up and trying to understand it a lot more and asking, but I'd love the guys to know, because it's not necessarily obvious for everyone.
Yeah. Well, first thing you have to understand is that the ovaries are doing something different than the uterus during the menstrual cycle. So you'll sometimes hear people say there's 4 phases to the menstrual cycle because they're counting the period as a separate phase. That's what the uterus is doing. And the ovaries don't care what the uterus is doing because they have their own agenda. So starting from day 1, we only start the cycle from day 1, which is the first day that you have flow in your period. It's just the easiest way to track the cycle. On day 1 of your period, your hormones are at their lowest. So progesterone and estrogen has dropped, and that triggers you to shed the lining of the uterus, which is the endometrial lining. Basically cleaning house, getting ready for the next round of trying to make a baby. Now, by about day 3, your FSH and your LH are rising. So FSH is a brain hormone that tells the ovaries to get an egg ready. It's a follicle stimulating hormone. That's why this is the follicular phase. The entire goal of the follicular phase is to get to ovulation. So follicular phase runs from day 1 of your period until ovulation occurs. So during this, brain's talking to ovaries, we're getting an egg ready around day 10-ish. And I use this based on a 28-day cycle because it's easiest just to understand that your cycle might be a little bit different. Around day 10-ish, libido starts to increase because testosterone is increasing. We're going to see lubrication starting to increase. We're seeing, we're going to be heading towards that fertile cervical mucus. So this is something that with like, if you're using fertility awareness method, like if you're really in the mood and you're not on hormonal birth control, no, you're probably about to ovulate. Now, this is important to know. Sperm live about 5 days. The egg lives about 24 hours. So we've got a 6-day fertile window, which means that if on day 10 you have sex and then on day 14 you ovulate, you can become pregnant if the semen are still available. So with that ovulation, what we're going to see first is estrogen's going to spike, then luteinizing hormone's going to spike, and then that's going to tell the ovary to release an egg. Ovulation is a 1-day event. So we've got this like, roughly we say like, 13, 14-day follicular phase. Ovulation is 1 day. After ovulation, what's left behind in the ovary is the corpus luteum. And it's a structure that's now going to produce progesterone. Estrogen and testosterone were rising in the follicular phase. They hang around, but now progesterone comes online. And that takes us through the luteal phase. If you get to the end of the luteal phase, which we say roughly like, that's about another 10, 14 days or so. If you get to the luteal phase and you do not have any HCG pumping, so that beta HCG, your body's like, you're not pregnant, you will drop those hormones and then your period will start again. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, completely. It's really interesting because I was discussing this the other day with one of my team, and it's really interesting from a guy's perspective to say, okay, so day 1 is obviously the period begins, and that's when it's shedding the lining, and then just before ovulation, you start getting really, well, I guess horny, to say it like a guy would. Basically,
everybody says that. No, it's not just a guy thing.
I'm trying to tread carefully instead of speaking like a bloke because I'm conscious. But and it's like, well, actually, mate. There's like a guy would continuously be in their mind, I guess. Mate, and then if it isn't fertilized, there's the feedback loop, I guess, that goes, oh, I haven't been fertilized, so then I'm going to continue and then prepare for the next one, opposed to being pregnant. And then again, I'm speaking as a layman, and I hope the guys and girls listening can appreciate that, is when the girls that I know of, colleagues, are tracking their cycle, doing their temperature and using the various apps and things like that. They know whether or not they're pregnant or not by their body temperature, depending on where they are in their cycle and things. So it's really, really interesting. I'm like, how can you be so sure without using contraception that you're not pregnant? And one of them said, and I can't remember whether it was the temperature was low or high after ovulation, but they said, yeah, we're definitely not pregnant. So
yeah, the temperature will go down. Also, leading up to your period, you just start. It's a very interesting thing. There are some people who have no idea, but when you are doing fertility awareness method, I will say you are so in tune with your body and tracking your symptoms that I found that most of my patients do know. And they're like, yeah, something's up. I just had a feeling. So I took a pregnancy test 4 days before I even expected my period, and I was pregnant. And what's really interesting is that I wear an Oura ring, and I can actually see. So I have used fertility monitors. I practice fertility awareness method. That doesn't mean that you guys should do it too. That's just what I do, and being honest about that. And I wear an Oura ring, and I've noticed that on my Oura ring, I can see the temperature spike. And I'm like, Oura ring is not approved as a contraceptive device like Natural Cycles is. And yet I can see it. I can see it show up on my Oura ring. So that's just one data point for people to understand. Typically with fertility awareness method, we're doing basal body temperature, which is you wake up first thing in the morning, you take your temperature. It's a very slight spike. So you have to do it for like at least 3 months so that you can really understand what's going on. But you have to track your symptoms because that's only one data point, and the efficacy rate with fertility awareness method only comes when you marry the symptoms with the signs that you're getting. So you're actually getting the temperature spike, and then again, if you're in the mood, you have fertile cervical mucus. Some will actually fill their cervix position as well. That's a lot more tricky, which is why I recommend actually meeting with a fertility awareness educator. I think that they are fantastic at helping you be the most successful. And I will say that, like most, I mean, in medical school, we're taught like never to use or recommend that method because it's a big liability, really. I mean, if you get pregnant, it's a big deal. And, you know, there's jokes that are made often about it, about how it's the I'll see you when you're pregnant method that doctors will say. And when my patients started coming to me and they were practicing that, and I was like, oh, okay, like, let's make sure we're using barrier methods. I'm going to support you in this, but like, have your barrier methods, have this conversation. And then they would be like, I'm going to get pregnant. I'm going to try next month. And then they would. And I'm like, wait a minute. It's supposed to take you like several months of trying to get pregnant. And you've been practicing this for how long? Oh, 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, 10 years. And you've never gotten pregnant in that time. And that's really what started to make me dig deeper into the research that we do have. And I'm like, whoa, this is like, there's something to this. So it can be a great method. I think if you are trying to conceive, it's a great way to get ready for that. But if you just, you know, you can use it for pregnancy prevention. Even if you just want to know your body and being very intimate, I imagine, you know, anyone listening to this is a biohacker. Like, you have to be practicing fertility awareness method as a woman. And I'm like, this isn't to should you into anything, but like, that is your, like, that's your extra data. And as you alluded to earlier, there are differences in men and women, and most of the research is being done on men because they're really easy and simple. We want to do keto studies on men. We want to do, you know, intermittent fasting studies on men. We want to do all this stuff on men because we don't have to worry about a cycle. We don't have these compounding variables. And so to understand that, like, if you want to really dial in things that are very unique to you and your makeup, tracking these signs and symptoms, tracking your entire menstrual cycle can help you do that. And at this point, yes, we can do hormone testing, but we don't have lab testing that's every single day of the month, every single month. And to understand that what you do now is going to affect your period, not just next month, but 3 months from now, 6 months from now, which can go both ways. Like, you could mess it up and then you're like, why is everything so awful? If you're tracking your data, you understand, like, okay, that this thing happened. It also can be that you're doing everything really well. And then you're like, my periods are so easy. Like, I don't understand. I'm just going to go back to not sleeping and like doing all these other things. And then you're like, oh, whoops. So just to understand that, that's why it's also important to be tracking all this data, is because it's not like, I mean, men can change things and in a week's time start to notice these changes. We are cyclical creatures. We've got at least this month that we're going through a cycle that it can take to really know what's going on in our body. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, thanks. Was that when I was checking my metabolic rate, actually a long time ago, I was checking my body temperature 3 times a day on waking and before bed and whatnot, and then tracking to see whether or not it was consistent every day, whether it was too high or too low, to check the adrenals and the thyroid. And I remember reading, this must have been like 10 years ago now, and they said, well, depending on where the woman is in the cycle, it's not the same for guys, not the same as it is for guys. I'm like, God, it must be so complicated. It's hard enough doing this stuff and figuring this stuff out. And then adding in, for instance, I was trying Armour Thyroid at the time before I learned about MTHFR. So I tried Armour Thyroid and saw my body temperature come up, but my adrenals weren't good enough to be able to sustain it. And it just made me crash again. And
totally. 2 weeks later, you're like, I can't get out of bed.
It's like, it's interesting because the analogy on it, I won't go off in too much detail on it, but I once heard that your adrenals are the engine and your thyroid is the accelerator. And if you push the accelerator down, the thyroid, the engine, and it's not ready, it'll burn out. And it's really interesting. And I remember thinking, like, and I was plotting this on this chart for like 6-9 months. And I just remember thinking, depending, if I was a female, depending on where I am in my cycle, like, I would not be able to really make head nor tail. And I was holding on for dear life at the time. So it's just really complicated machinery. But then when speaking to one of my friends, female, the other week, and she was saying about how her cervix hadn't opened and how she's tracking all of this data and where she is in her cycle and her body temperature and all these things, just like I love tracking with my Oura ring. I love tracking things like my constant glucose with the monitor, and then overlaying that with my sleep to see where that is, to see if my deepest sleep happens when my glucose is a good low, but not too low, and all these pieces. And she was like really excited about tracking her cycle and all of these data points for her body, not to the point where it stressed her out, because that would obviously have a negative effect, but she was genuinely excited tracking this stuff to see what her body was. It's like there's more biomarkers available to her than us guys have, and she almost treated it like a toy, a fun toy. So anyway, so yeah, I really felt like that really sits well and resonates. So I got one more question for you before we talk about your book and where people can find you. But one of my team said you talk about seed cycling. Can you tell me about that, please?
Yeah. So seed cycling is an adjunct therapy. It helps you not only get in tune with your body, but it nourishes you with what you need during your cycle. And so I always get asked, like, do we have a randomized control trial in seed cycling? I'm like, do we have anyone who wants to pay for that? Like, let me know. I'll set it up. Just tell me if there's some money available. We do not have a specific study on seed cycling itself. It's something that I've personally practiced for over a decade. The individual who taught it to me had published a book over 20 years ago and they've been using it in clinical practice. And so this is just something that's been used in clinical practice to support the menstrual cycle. And what we do have are studies that support the seeds and how they work within the body. So with seed cycling, the premise is that you're going to start with your period. So this is just the easiest way to start it. I have a bunch of information at drbrighten.com on this, but you're going to start with fresh ground flax seeds and pumpkin seeds. These are going to supply you. So we think of flax seeds as, estrogenic. Yet they have lignans in them, and so they have the ability to actually modulate estrogen. And this is important because people will often say, well, if you have estrogen dominance, then you don't want to do flax seeds. And then they start quoting these studies that are actually on flax oil. Flax oil, yes, that's going to be estrogenic. There's actually a study on prostate cancer being made worse because of the estrogenic properties of that. And you might be like, why are we talking about prostate? Because prostates are very sensitive to estrogen. And so it is a good metric for us to look at, especially because as women, we've got these same receptors. So spoiler, men and women have the same receptors and the same hormones, just in varying amounts. Men don't get prolactin and get to breastfeed in their life cycle, though they shouldn't. So that's one thing. So to understand that, the flax seeds can actually help modulate estrogen. So they can help with estrogen production through the follicular phase, which estrogen is not a bad thing, and you need it, and it must spike so that you can ovulate. And then the zinc, and these have fats in them. They have all kinds of stuff going on, but the zinc also has the pumpkin seeds have zinc. That's what I'm trying to say. And the zinc can help with modulating testosterone so that you get the right amount of testosterone, but we're not pushing it into DHT and losing our hair or getting acne on our face. So you get the libido, you get the energy, you get the muscle mass, like you get, all of that, the great mood, but you don't get like the fallout of testosterone. After ovulation, you're going to flip and you're going to go into sesame seeds and sunflower seeds. Again, these have lignans as well. There's interaction with all of these seeds that are helping your gut health. If your gut's right, you're going to move your estrogen out just the way that you should be. Stress hormones are going to be better. Inflammation is going to be better. But those seeds are going to contain fatty acids, and nutrients are then going to help really support progesterone through the cycle. It's funny because I've always talked a lot about it, but it's recently become more of a trend. Some people are like, oh, this is just the latest fad. And I'm like, just because you arrived to the party doesn't mean that like this is a new game. Like you just got here. But the other thing is I see people out there saying like, oh, it's a cure-all and like it'll fix everything. And like, oh, it's just the one thing you have to do. I say this is an adjunct therapy because we're using it as a dietary intervention to help support your menstrual cycle. But, it's not going to be the only thing that you're doing. And I think that's important to understand. I was in Cosmo, and the gal who had interviewed me, she had used it and cleared her acne. And there's all of these anecdotal stories to which everybody's like, that's anecdotal. And, you'll often hear things like, oh, it's probably just placebo. I'm like, yeah, because you just wished your acne away with some seeds and that worked. Like you've been wishing your acne away all this time, right? And to that, I'm like, if it's anecdotal, but it works for you and you're happy, then I don't really care. Like, there are so many things that like, you know, I think especially in like the biohacking world of like, you're never going to get studies that really can dial in the individual. Like, I think so often it's why, like, you know, Chinese medicine, where they're like, oh, you hear people say Chinese medicine doesn't work and the acupuncture doesn't work. And yeah, it's like, well, you're trying to apply a one size fits all in a modality that's very individualized. And that is really where we're seeing all of health move towards, because I think a lot of people have woken up that the one size fits all doesn't fit me. In fact, it doesn't fit like anyone except those who fell underneath the bell curve, and we just don't talk about all the outliers. So that's seed cycling, and it's something that if you're going to do it, you need to give it at least 3 months, again, because it can take time to see how something affects your menstrual cycle. And you know, worst case scenario is you're more nourished and you have more nutrients in your diet.
Yeah, awesome. Really awesome. So, okay, cool. So, well, where can people find you, Jenny? Because I'm conscious we've got to wrap up today. But I mean, I could, in all honesty, go on for a lot longer.
Well, we're going to be doing this in London soon. So,
yeah. So I mean, obviously the guys will get to see you in London talking about this on stage. So that'd be really awesome. But in the meantime, I mean, I really recommend they read your book. My team have been going on about your book for a long time now.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's we're featuring female optimization quite like in a big way actually this year. I think it's because it has come to the forefront. In biohacking has been predominantly male for a very, very long time. So, I mean, our audience is actually 51-49 in favor of females versus a lot of the other biohacking conferences out there. And I'm not talking about the bulletproof one, but the others are generally, you know, like 70-80% male. So I'm really happy we're tailoring that way. But in the meantime, anyway, so yeah, your book is obviously Beyond the Pill. It's one of my team has actually done the 30-day protocol that you've got in there and was going on about it last week again.
Oh, so, nice.
Yeah. So anyway, your book is Beyond the Pill.
Yeah. And you can find me on Instagram at Dr Jolene Brighten. You can find me at TikTok, same handle. If you want to see me dancing around being ridiculous about hormones, that's where you can find me. Trying to educate people in 15 seconds. It's definitely a thing. And then my main hub is drbrighten.com, drbrighten.com. We have tons of free resources, articles, all kinds of information to help you really get in tune with your body. And if you are looking for a place to kickstart a non-dogmatic way of eating to really support your hormones, you can go to drbrighten.com/hormone kit. And we have a whole kit to get you started on understanding your hormones. We have a meal plan, recipe guide, the works, so that you can basically take the medicine back into your hands, recognizing that the majority of healing happens outside the doctor's office. So we might as well get you started.
Awesome. Okay, so it's really cool, and they can come and see you, meet you, hear you at the Health Optimisation Summit next year, and get their book signed as well, all at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming today, Jolene. I really appreciate your time. I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person, because I've seen so much of you. As I say, you said about educating people in 15 seconds. I've seen you on Instagram popping around in disco outfits and things like that, but it's really catchy. It's really catchy. And we were talking about it a couple of weeks ago. It's really, really cool because it does catch the attention. And I think like health has been so medical and boring for so long. It's great that it's being shaped up. So yeah, kudos, really good, kudos.
Well, we just like to have fun. Plus I own a bunch of wigs. So yes, guys, you will find me in wigs. And I've had people that they get so upset and they're like, you're so ridiculous and I cannot take you seriously as long as you're wearing these wigs. And I'm like, well, that's kind of the point, is like, can we stop taking this all so seriously and just have fun? Because I don't know if you know this, I homeschool my son, and I'm like, you actually learn better when you're having a good time. Like, you actually learn better when you're having fun, and it sticks with you. So why don't you just have fun? But some people, they just hate the wigs, and they're like, that's like part of being a doctor. People are like, can you just look one way and act one way? And I'm like, no, I'm a total weirdo, and like, welcome to the party.
There's a saying is don't take life so seriously, because we're never going to get out alive. So,
yeah, right.
So yeah, well, it's lovely to catch up with you today.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time. I'm really looking forward to seeing you at the summit.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to be in London. So anyone, if you're going to be there, let me know on Instagram. I'd love to know if you're going to be there so that we can meet up.
Yeah, so just remind me of your handle for Instagram one last time. Is it?
At Dr Jolene Brighten.
Okay, perfect. Okay, lovely. Okay, guys. Well, thank you very much for listening in today, and catch you for the next episode. I hope you enjoyed today's interview, and if you want to meet the speaker live and get your book signed, check out the Health Optimization Summit. It has 50 speakers, 100 of your favorite brands exhibiting, 1,200 other health optimizers just like you, over 2 days, with one huge European community. Check out summit.healthoptimization.com. And if you're overwhelmed by all of the health things that you're hearing and don't know where to start on your health optimization journey, check out my Health Optimization program. It's a step-by-step digital course to guide you through the fundamentals of health. It has how-to guides, a private Slack community to support all your questions, and will help you master your health optimization journey. If you're wanting to dramatically optimize your health, quash fatigue, take control of your diet, and optimize your health once and for all, this course is for you. Check out course.healthoptimization.com.